Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hello, I'm Sabrina Schaefer, Executive Director of the Independent Women's Forum and your host for today's Working for Women podcast. Today I'm here with Carrie Lucas, our Managing Director at IWF, and we're going to be talking about the recent proposed Department of Labor regulation, which would require businesses to provide more data to the government about employee compensation. Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today. So first, can you give us a little background?
Yes, sure. For a long time, I bet that listeners here have been hearing about the supposed problem that women earn less money than men do for equal work. You'll hear it referred to as the wage gap, and this idea, you'll hear a statistic that women earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. Well, as you and I know, Sabrina, it's a little more complicated than that. But for a long time, Democrats have been trying to propose legislation to try to solve that. They really want to close the wage gap and make sure that women are all getting as much as they're owed. And they proposed a number of new regulations on businesses to try to advance that goal. And one of them is this new regulation from the EEOC.
So, let's back up for 1 second, Carrie, and talk for another minute about the wage gap, because I think that you and I both know that this problem, this idea that women are only paid 79 cents for every dollar a man makes, is overstated. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, Sabrina. I think it's funny. I know that you and I both have made a lot of decisions in our lives, but when we're deciding what jobs to take on, we aren't always prioritizing money. Sometimes I know you've got kids and I've got kids, and when we go to evaluate things like job prospects or how much work to take on, we have to balance out the trade-offs between work and family. Well, we're not aberrations. A lot of women are thinking like us, and women start thinking like this long before they have children. And in fact, we know from what women tend to focus on in college, the careers they choose, they tend to be prioritizing things other than the almighty dollar. They enjoy working with people. Right. They're often willing to trade more freedom and personal fulfillment, more flexibility and taking a little less pay. This isn't, I think that sometimes these conversations make it sound like men are doing it right, or we have some kind of war between the sexes, when, it's really, this is people's preferences, and no choice is right or wrong. We need to let people follow their hearts and make the right decisions, and not worry about how these statistics fall out, and not pretend that it's discrimination that's at the root of this.
So even if, listeners agree with you and me about the real causes behind the small wage gap, I bet a lot of people are thinking, well, what's the big deal about asking businesses to fill out a little more paperwork? Aren't we just sort of doing our due diligence? Isn't this not the worst thing that government can do? So is there a big harm in this?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're absolutely right. I think a lot of people say, businesses, they have to fill out a bunch of paperwork anyway. What's the problem with what this EEOC regulation would have businesses do is include data in their compensation paperwork they already have to file, but include things like the sex of the workers, some racial backgrounds and other demographic information, so that the EEOC can kind of comb through that data and look for anything that stands out as discrimination. There's a lot of problems just with too much paperwork and red tape for businesses in general, but that's really not the worst of it. I think if that's all where it was, and it was really solving a problem, then we might say okay. But the problem is what businesses are going to do when they start thinking about what this paperwork looks like. We all know that businesses are very concerned about the cost of things like litigation. The last thing in the world a business wants is to have the EEOC come out and say you're discriminating against people. So if I'm sitting there, and you and I are both managers, we help make employment decisions for our small nonprofit that we help run together. And we know that if you had someone looking at your employment decisions, you might say, "Oh goodness, I know the reason why I'm paying this employee more than that other employee." But if I had to try to think of how that's going to look on a piece of paper, that's going to be very different. And the bottom line may be that a lot of businesses are going to feel much more hamstrung and try to move towards a more rigid one-size-fits-all compensation policy.
I was thinking about you and I and thinking how much you and I benefit from having some flexibility in our schedules. And I'm wondering what a law like this might mean for other women and men, for that matter, who value flexibility and who might be willing to make a trade-off with salary in order to have that flexibility. Would employers be able to give them those kind of sort of unique job descriptions or job situations, or would they have to make one-size-fits-all jobs for every employee?
Well, absolutely. It would just, they certainly could, but it would come with a lot more risk. So if I'm a risk-adverse manager, which most managers, good managers, are pretty risk-adverse, why would you risk it? The idea that the EEOC and the Department of Labor is going to come down and file complaints against you. A lot of people are going to say, I'm sorry. I know you wish you could leave every day at 4 o'clock, and you're willing to take a pay cut to do that, but I can't do that. It's not fair to somebody else for you to be paid the same. So you're going to have to either keep your normal hours or and keep your same pay, or else this is what we're offering you. There's going to be a lot less flexibility. I think about some of the situations that you and I have faced with women who've had babies and decided they wanted to work on a new situation. You and I have approached that question trying to figure out what's the best for our organization and to make sure that it works for the nonprofit and for the people who invest in IWF. But we're also thinking we want to make a situation that works for that unique worker's needs. So we've been able to do that for folks. But boy, if I knew that part of our audit was going to include this kind of paperwork, we would definitely have to approach it differently. So this is I think that anybody out there who's been involved in human resources and management decisions knows that this has enormous consequences for the decision making of business leaders out there.
Right. So this definitely sounds like something that we do not want to support, and we hope that our listeners understand a little bit more about it now. I do know that there are plenty of policy reforms that we need so that women are keeping more of their take-home pay, so that life is a little easier for them and for their families. And you and I have been working really hard on our upcoming project, Working for Women policy agenda, which will be released this April and which will hopefully put forth some positive economic reforms that will help women and men, have more economic flexibility and freedom in their lives, right?
Absolutely. And I do think we all know that there are certainly bad bosses out there, and discrimination is already illegal. That's why we have laws on the books that are meant to protect workers and give them the right to seek recourse when they truly are being harmed and treated unfairly. We have this very delicate balancing act, though, and that pursuing regulations or a legal system that's too tilted on the side of lawsuits and will make it so there's fewer job opportunities. That can really backfire on the folks we most want to help and women who are concerned about. The best thing we can do for workers, the best protection that we can give people is a robust job market. That way that if you don't like your job, if you feel like you're being mistreated, you can go and find another employment situation that works for you. Employers would then, if we had more good jobs out there, employers would know that they would have to treat employees with respect. They would have to pay them fairly because they would fear losing valued employees. So that's the system that we really need, and that's what we should be focused on, not trying to have the government through a bunch of red tape try to make everything perfect, because that's just not going to work, because there's people define perfect very differently.
That's right, and we don't want to strangle that economic growth with more government regulations. Well, this has been another great edition of IWF's Working for Women podcast, and for those who listen, thank you for your time. You can find out more about this topic and all things related to women in the workplace and many other topics at IWF.org. We hope you'll visit us soon.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by IWF.org for similar content.